Morning, everyone. Morning. So we're going to be discussing Labour's latest reshuffle, and I've already seen some of the comments. Now, what I'm going to say is this. I am massively opposed to factionalism. I have seen over my decades of life and interest in politics because, you know, I've been interested in politics since before I was a teenager, long before I was a teenager. It was incredibly interesting when I was growing up. And I have seen multiple cycles. I've now seen, I think, 2 full cycles of the Labour Party. And I've seen how toxic factionalism destroys it. And I've seen some of those comments in there. And what I'm going to say is this, with your views, because we're going to discuss factionalism. I want to discuss factionalism with relation to the reshuffle, not in necessarily the same way. Sorry if you hear drilling and stuff. I can't help it. There's work going on. If anyone has a comment to make that is not in, that is from a point of view of I am here and you are there and therefore you are my enemy, then you don't have ideas. You don't. You're just dumb. You know, because it's very self-defeating. The issue with Labour is lots of like. What you'll notice, here's the thing, if you're thinking to yourself, oh, this is a very Blairite shadow cabinet, do you know what the right-wing papers are saying? Oh, this is a very Blairite shadow cabinet. That's what they're saying. If you're saying the same thing, you're basically falling for what the right-wing want you to say. And I'm going to show you what the Times have been saying before and after as well. But in fact, William's saying the greatest barrier to Labour getting elected are the various factions within the party tearing Labour down. Yeah, and this is one of the things. So my objection to the general reshuffle, because people will see it as, oh, right, Labour's got lots of factions, right? But if we focus on 2 factions, the hard left and the centrists, right? So 2 sort of factions there, and the hard left isn't necessarily just Corbynites, because the Corbynites are supporters of Corbyn, and Corbyn's on the hard left, and yes, many of those Corbynites are on the hard left as well. But there are others who recognise that Jeremy Corbyn was no good, that he was the wrong horse to back, but they're still in that tribe. And then your centrists, they're not all Blairites. I mean, some of them are Brownites, some of them are neither. Some of them recognise that Blair did get things wrong, and they recognise that Brown got things wrong. But so I'm talking about centrists and the hard left, right? And they are always at each other's throats. And the bottom line is, it's really this simple. There's no coincidence that you might think the Labour Party looks like it's more, that the centrists are happier about the shape of the shadow cabinet when they're about to win power. And that is because most of the voters are there. You know, we're a democracy. So most people... This is why people on the hard left, most of them are not really into democracy. They accept that we have a democratic system, so they have to try and work with it. But there's a real strong Trotskyite element on the hard left. And these are people, for those who don't know, these are people who want armed... So you'll always hear talk about revolution, or we need a revolution. It's like, well, we're not going to get a revolution, because you know what? Most people aren't on your side. But that's what they want. They want to, like, forcibly take over the country. Because most voters are grouped around the centre, we know from most voters in this country are sort of the general political shape of the country is centre-left. So naturally, if you're going to have a Labour Party, parliamentary party, that is mirroring the general population and therefore going to win power, it will look centre-left. It will be. I understand that as being very much on the left. It will be centre-left. If it doesn't look like that, it's not going to win the election. The problem I have is, so I was looking at this reshuffle yesterday, and I'll go through some of the points. I did do a video on it yesterday, by the way, so I don't want to cover too much of that on my own channel, but I'll cover the odd thing as I need, because not everyone will have watched it. And I will just, you know, say, look, I was dismayed when I saw, because I follow various people online, and some are on the, you know, hard and soft left, and some are centrist. And I saw the centrists all hooping for joy, going, we've got our party back, we've got control of our party again. And my head was in my hands, and I just thought, oh my God. Because it's what'll happen with, I'll tell you what'll happen with this factionalism. Because I've seen it now, and I've seen it twice. It'll happen again. It's just going to keep circling round. So what will happen now, right? The Labour Party is now in a position where it will appeal to voters, so it'll win. So then we'll be in government, we'll make things better, and some things we won't make better enough, if you like, you know, out of timidity or whatever reason. But we'll make things better, things will work just like they did last time, just like they did the time before. And then what will happen is we'll get complacent because we can see what toxic faction, because we've got factionalism in Labour, but most of the pragmatic people in various factions, and I'm not in any, by the way, I hate the whole concept of it. But most people are just keeping their heads down. Don't matter where they are, even people on the hard left, most of them, the ones who want a Labour government, are just keeping their heads down going, eyes on the prize, we're going to win this. Because we're sick of being in opposition. We're sick of what the Tories are doing. The Tories right now are stood in front of collapsing school buildings saying, yeah, we're not going to do anything about this, but you should thank us. You should thank us for our good work. That's what the Education Secretary's been saying. But the Tories at the moment are tearing each other apart over their toxic factionalism because they're complacent. They're not sick of being in opposition for years because they're in government. So they're complacent. It doesn't matter that they're about to lose. They're still, but they've been in power for so long that and that's what will happen to Labour. And I know it's what will happen to Labour because it's what did happen to Labour. It's happened twice in my lifetime now. And it'll happen again. I absolutely hate the fact that people on the centre are all, you know, they're already sort of aligned. You know, the people we might say on the right of the party, like centre, centre-left, they're already aligned with voters. So, of course, when the party is shaped in their image, so to speak, that's when it's going to be fit for government. So I understand their frustration when there's sort of leftward moves. But the problem will be, as this Labour government will eventually run out of steam. It will. It will. It will run out of steam. The last one did. This one will. Of course it will. And they'll try and defend their legacy rather than drive a new one, you know. So they'll run out of steam. And then what will happen is the elastic will snap back the other way. And I just fear that we're just going to have this constant cycle. Why cannot the people in Labour just go, can we not, we recognise that the shape of the public face of the party, which is the parliamentary party, has to resemble the centre-left because that's where voters are. And we know that's what most of the policies are going to be. We know that that's what most of them are going to be because that's what won the election. Unless we can convince the voters to move further to the left. That's what we should be doing, those of us on the left. We should be persuading voters to move further to the left. Then the Labour Party will naturally mirror that, right? That's how it'll work. But this toxic factionalism, and there is a sense in which I actually blame those on the centre-left more than the hard left. Because the centre-left are getting what they want. Can't they just be happy with that? Why do they have to, like, stick two fingers up at the rest of the party? Why do they have to engage in this them and us? Because all it means is there's going to come a time when they'll be moaning again. Because the them says, right, you've run out of steam now, it's time for us to take over. Because that's what will happen. You've run out of ideas, we've got ideas. And that's what will win over. Because do you know what? Most of the party membership are further to the left than voters. Just like most of the Conservative Party membership are further to the right than voters. The only thing at the moment that's got the Labour membership going, you know, you do your stuff, is not because they're fully behind every policy. It's because they're fully behind the one policy of actually forming a government. And at some point in the future, we'll get used to winning and we'll think, well, hang on a minute, we're quite good at winning. So now we can do things in a completely different way and still win. Because that's what happened last time. Didn't work, did it? Didn't work. Anyway, sorry, let's try and catch up with some comments. But then I am going to touch on what the Times thing did. Starmer is a neoliberal centre-right. No, of course he's not. That's utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. First of all, I'm going to say this. Every time someone uses the word neoliberal, you are exposing yourself as someone who doesn't know anything. Because I challenge you to say what neoliberalism is. I challenge you. You do not know. Second of all, Keir Starmer. Should we go through the list again? Represented striking minors. Many of them for free because they couldn't afford it. Took on large corporation and won. Again, pro bono, which means basically if you don't win, I don't take any money from you. Right? Beat McDonald's. Went around the world, right? Basically persuading countries to abolish the death sentence. So saved many people's lives, right? There is not a single figure on the hard left, not one single figure that has Keir Starmer's socialist credentials. Not one of them has achieved anything in the name of socialism, whereas Keir Starmer has. And if you look at Keir Starmer's background, it's very, very clear that he is very much on the left. Now, his government, they're very much on the right of the party because that's how you win elections. Keir Starmer isn't doing all this because Keir Starmer is not trying to... Corbyn tried to turn Labour into his image because he's an egomaniac. Keir Starmer isn't. Keir Starmer's tried to turn the Labour Party into what voters will vote for. He's not pushing his own, right? It's really that simple. And anyone that says otherwise, again, you either have no ideas, you don't know, you're just parroting what someone else has said. I'm just going to be as blunt as that. Or you have no idea about Keir Starmer's background. None at all. But anyway, let us... I think it's worthwhile just going over what the right wing are saying. I want to pick on two articles in the Times, right? So here we go. So this one was July, so a couple of months ago, nearly. Hesitant Starmer's got a reshuffle problem. Now, what he does, he starts off here. Have you heard of Jim McMahon? Be honest, you probably haven't. There's no point pretending you've heard of him. So he was the Shadow Secretary of State for DEFRA. He resigned yesterday. If you have, you're likely to know only that he's in line for the sack. This is in no small part because you haven't heard of his work as Shadow Environment Secretary. If you had, he might be keeping his job. And that's all. So they're basically saying if someone, excuse me, if someone in a very prominent shadow cabinet role is not known by the public, then they're not doing a good job. I agree with that. I said as much in my video yesterday. So then what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at and this is why I have an issue with the reshuffle. I'm not going to say, oh, it's all doom and gloom, it's all terrible. It's not all terrible, but there were some things, right? And I don't want to, I've mentioned this before, and it'd be like I'm picking on her, and I don't want to pick on her, right? She might be brilliant in many ways. But I'm going to look at this. Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Secretary of State for Education. How many of the public do you think have heard of her? If you go down the street and ask a general member of the public, do you vote? Ask it for voters. If people go, oh, I never vote, okay, you can. They're choosing not to be involved in the country, right? But for people who vote, ask someone, oh, do you vote? Do you know who Bridget Phillipson is? I'll bet you most will say, no, I don't know who you mean. Why is she still there? Jim McMahon was replaced at DEFRA because he wasn't making any, and he wasn't. And I know he wasn't. I know he wasn't making any impact. What impact she made? There's been a schools crisis since January. Never mind it blowing up now. Never mind it blowing up now. I knew about it I did a video on school buildings being imminent threat of collapse in January. That's how long this has been public knowledge. The government have known about it for years, but it's been public knowledge since January. Why hasn't she made something of it? She's still there. That's my issue. She's still there. But the other thing, so what what the Times are now saying now, so this is today's article on it. Well, it might be, they'll have written it yesterday, but it's published today. Even Tony Blair didn't have this many Blairites in his cabinet. There in 11 short words, a Labour MP gets the heart of a shadow cabinet reshuffle that has proved beyond doubt Sir Keir Starmer's authority and complete perhaps the most dramatic political metamorphosis in recent history. Now, there is an element in which that is absolutely true. They do make the point, and it's a very good point. Lisa Nan, and I said this was a terrible decision politically. Lisa Nandy got a proper demotion. Like, it's not even. She's in the shadow cabinet. She won't be after they're in power, because the job she's got is not a shadow cabinet job, right? And she's effective. She is visible. She is effective. She's an asset to the party. Don't make her party leader ever. Don't do that, because she's strategically inept. But she's good in what was her previous role. She'd be good as education secretary, I think. But she got a proper demotion. And do you know what? She just took it. Because I'll tell you what the Times are pointing out, which is accurate. Keir Starmer carried out this reshuffle. I don't think objectively, on balance, it was a good reshuffle. Lisa Nandy getting a demotion. Alan Khan not even in shadow cabinet. Terrible, terrible decision. Bridget Phillips, again, the last thing I'll say about it, because it's making it sound like I'm picking on her, she might be a really good administrator, but politically, no, she's not ready yet. Put her back. She's still there. For me, those were the three massive missteps. And yet, Lisa Nandy didn't complain. Rosina Allen Khan made her feelings clear, but also didn't rock the boat. Keir Starmer has gotten away with this. I say that as if he's committing some great crime, but, you know, he's gotten away with it without any aggro. It's not just that he's been able to do it. He's been able to do it with the people affected, not... Like, Lisa Nandy will know she's been doing a good job. It won't be conceit. She'll know she's been doing a good job. She knows that this isn't a good move, not just for her. I don't care about her. I don't care about anyone. I don't care about Starmer. I don't care about any of them. They're there to do a job, a duty. She's... she didn't even complain. She didn't even complain. Steve Kirk, £10 super chat. Thank you very much. Very well supported there. But there we go. Oh, there could have been a comment. It says, stop being a Starmer fanboy, or be making a mug of you. I'm not anyone's fanboy. I don't care about any of them. Starmer at the moment has my support because he's going to win the election. But I will still, whenever he does something that I don't support, I will say so. I don't, on balance, I like some aspects of the reshuffle. I accept others. But on balance, I think there are things wrong with it, and I will say so. And I will say so. I've said recently when they had their meltdown after the Uxbridge by-election loss, and he took two major missteps, I criticised that. I will always criticise, but I criticise, I don't attack. When I criticise, I say, I think this is wrong for this reason, and this is what I think should be better, and for this reason. That's criticism. If you just attack, you just attack. I'm not interested in personalities. Starmer is useful at the moment. As soon as he's not useful, I'll want him gone. It's really that simple. You know, a Labour, particularly the higher you are up in the Labour hierarchy, you are there as a servant. You're there to serve the party and the public. And it's really that simple. And if you don't want to do that, you can get out of the way. Right? And while you are useful, I will want you there. And as soon as you're not useful, I will want you gone. So that is why I will say of people who may be lovely people in the shadow cabinet that I do not think are being effective, get out the way. I don't care about their feelings. They might be absolutely lovely people who don't deserve, like, rudeness, but the job's too important. I'm not, there's no cult of personality about me. I'm not interested in personalities. I'm interested in outcomes. I will always say that, outcomes. Starmer is delivering the outcome I need. He's still making mistakes, though. And that's really all there is to it. Peter's saying, I think Phillipson's like Annalisa Dodds, very intelligent, very good at what she does, but Labour need a shadow education secretary who makes Keegan swear again and again and again. Yes. Like, we can, okay. I mean, that's for me. Do you know what? That is exactly what it is for me. Gillian Keegan, sorry about the noise. I'll get the mic closer. Oh, hello. Gillian Keegan, we saw her yesterday. As soon as she was put under pressure, completely melted down. Can't take pressure. She completely melted. That was the first pressure she's faced in her job. She hasn't been Education Secretary for that long, remember. Only really since Sunak came in. But she was put under pressure and she completely folded. Why hadn't Phillipson put her under that pressure before now? Why hadn't she done that? Like, you look at, she came into the shadow cabinet at the same time as Wes Streeting. So Wes Streeting went to health, she went to education. At the time, I said, I'd have preferred it if Streeting went to education and Rosina Allen Khan went to health, right? That's what I'd have preferred. And and the reason was that because at the time I recognised that Streeting was already an accomplished performer. I didn't know who Phillipson even was. Didn't know who she was. I still don't know who she is. That's the problem. Anyway. So yeah, I'm not interested in personalities. I'm only interested in their outcomes. If their outcomes are poor, I will say so. And if I look at this shadow cabinet now, so Angela Rayner, she's really good in her job. Annalisa Dodds, as you say, I mean, she was the shadow chancellor, absolutely on top of. I watched her in Parliament, completely on top of her brief, superb, but she made no impact with the public. So, you know, Shabana Mahmood obviously has done a really good job as national policy campaigner, but whether she'll do a good job at justice, we will see. You know, Rachel Reeves does have an impact with the public. The public do know who she is. Pat McFadden was in, he was like the chief secretary to the Treasury, I think. And he's now moved to the national campaign coordinator. David Lammer's quite effective. Yvette Cooper is going to be a brilliant Home Secretary. She's on top of a brief. Bridget Phillipson, yeah. Nick Thomas Simmons has been now made a minister without portfolio, which is basically a way of saying, look, I want you in the shadow cabinet because you've got useful things to say, but I don't trust you to run a department. So, you know, that's what that means. That's what that always means. You know, if you're minister without portfolio, it basically means I think you're politically sound. I want your views in cabinet, but my goodness, I'm not letting you run a department. John Healey, another one, Shadow Secretary of State for Defence. How many people know who John Healey is? Not many. But I will say this for him. Defence hasn't been an easy one to make a name for yourself because Labour are not that divergent with the Tories on defence. They've sort of been in step with them on a lot of things. So there hasn't been a lot to criticise the Tories for on. You can criticise the spending cuts and so on, but beyond that, there's not a lot. So I don't know whether that's because he's not good at making a name for himself or because he's got no material. Liz Kendall is an interesting one. I'm not sure. See, she was like she's described as a former leadership contender for Labour. But she was a leadership contender for Labour in the same way that Rory Stewart was in 2019. She didn't do very well. So I'm not sure about this one. Jonathan Reynolds stays in business. Ed Miliband. Do you know what the talk was over the last few weeks? Oh, he's going to sack Ed Miliband. Because that's what even the Times, like the Tories were trying to stoke up divisions. Do you remember that story the Times put out saying Keir Starmer, when Ed Miliband gave a presentation, like sounded like he wasn't interested in it. He said, oh, I hate tree huggers. And it's like, it doesn't even sound like Starmer. And they've been trying to do this. Oh, Miliband's up for the sack. Miliband's for the sack. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's far too effective. Wes Streeting stays there. Whatever. Jonathan Ashworth has been given a hefty demotion as well. I don't really have strong views on him. I think he's not a star, but he's not completely unknown either. So, you know, I still support him leaving there. Steve Reed went from Justice, where he made no impact. He's now gone to DEFRA. He'd better make an impact, otherwise, for me, like what Steve Reed needs to do, go and start. First of all, right? Do you know what's just been announced in the BBC today? That sewage, because that sewage dumping's his brief now. Sewage dumping, right? Sorry about the noise. Sewage dumping, the BBC are now reporting that water companies have been dumping raw sewage. Do you know how they say, oh, well, sometimes we have to do it because of the flooding and stuff like that? They were doing it on dry days. They've been doing it on dry days. Even the BBC are having to say they're just doing it because they can. He needs to make an immediate issue out of that. For me, I'm not convinced by Steve Reed. I think he should have been able to make a name. I think the Justice Department is in enough of a mess for him to have been able to like raise his profile. But at DEFRA, he's got everything he can possibly need. Everything. Right? Sewage dumping, the crisis in farming, crisis in food supply chains. He's the Minister for Food. He's the Shadow Secretary of State, well, not Minister, Shadow Secretary of State for Food. Right? We've got so many crises. And he can't, some people might say, oh yeah, but some of them are Brexit, the Labour have to tiptoe around that. Not on everything they don't. They don't have to tiptoe on everything. He's got a lot of material now. If he hasn't made a name for himself by the end of this year, if I'm not seeing him being like prominently reported on, he's not doing his job. That's what I'm going to say. Peter Turner saying, I've been impressed by Darren Jones at the Business Select Committee chair, succeeded Rachel Reeves. No chief Shadow Secretary to the Treasury. It looks like a move from planning for government to preparing for government. Oh yeah, this is absolutely what this is. Remember, some people have sort of complained, oh, you know, why do they have these shadow positions like this? Like, why are they mirroring the Tories thing? It's like, well, they're not going to, are they? As soon as Keir Starmer comes in, the shape of government will change. Quite a bit, actually, more than usual. Because what Starmer has identified, again, we're not getting a lot of news on this because it's not like one of the main things to push to voters. What Starmer has identified as a particular problem is there's various issues which are really important to deal with, but it's not clear whose responsibility they are because they're cross-department. Hence, for example, why Ed Miliband is the Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change and Net Zero. There is no Secretary of State for Climate Change and Net Zero. There isn't one. So Starmer has sort of created that one by saying, well, we need one in government. You know, which is why the fact that Ed Miliband's still there, this idea that Starmer's going to try and bin Miliband is a nonsense. Absolute nonsense. But that is the point he wants to make. So he wants government departments, but he also wants to appoint people who will have control of certain briefs which will run across departments. Because that's the problem. If you have an issue that needs dealing with, it's like, this is the Department for Business. No, it's the Department for Transport or something like that. And then because you don't know which cabinet minister has responsibility to it, because it sits across multiple departments, you basically end up with nothing getting done, which is something Starmer needs to fix. Again, like a more sort of career politician wouldn't necessarily see that because they're folded into the system. They just accept the system that you have government departments and, you know, you do what you can with them. Whereas Starmer's come in straight away and gone, well, sometimes you have issues that are cross departments and then who's going to drive it? No one. So that's I'm looking forward to that. That should make a difference. Damon's saying, please feel free to pick apart the 29 manifesto. The election was lost on personality, not policy. The policies were popular, but the problem was, it wasn't just personality, though. You're wrong on that one. Polling revealed that people didn't believe it could be delivered. So although they liked the outcomes, they didn't believe it could be delivered. So the manifesto was still a bad one. It doesn't matter that people approved of the policies. They didn't believe it would be delivered. And if they don't believe it will be delivered, they won't vote for it. They vote for what they believe will happen. They believed the 40 new hospitals, for example. Now, what is a policy of 40 new hospitals? Basically, replacing hospitals that are about to fall down. Is that something you should have as a major policy platform? We're going to stop hospitals falling down. That should be the bare minimum you expect of a government. But the Conservatives promised it as a major policy platform because it's like, oh, hospitals are good. We like the sound of that. And because it's deliverable. People know, well, of course you're going to build 40 new hospitals. They didn't. They didn't. They've actually allowed them to fall down. But there we go. HK saying, water companies will laugh at fines just like millionaires guffaw at parking fines. Not under Labour, they won't. I did a video on Labour Social on Sunday talking about Labour's policies on water companies. They won't be laughing at the fines under Labour, telling you that much. The most effective politicians have been Ed Miliband, Yvette Cooper, Angela Rayner, Chris Bryant. These four have stood out for me this year. Yes, I mean, Chris Bryant, I mean, we're talking about this in a stream on my own channel. in terms of whether he would be in the shadow cabinet. It's like, I think he even knows he would be no good there. He knows he's too much of a loose cannon. You can't, that's the other thing about, there are some very much on the left who in theory should be in the shadow cabinet, but they're not being excluded. It's because they're too much, they're loose. You can't have loose cannons. Because here's the problem. Let's say you get someone into the cabinet, shadow cabinet, doesn't matter. And you know, everything's going all right. And then all of a sudden you have to do a thing politically and they won't do it because they're too fixed in their ideology and they won't go with it. So they resign. That's quite damaging. You know, whenever someone resigns from your top team on a matter of principle, that's damaging for the party because the implication is that the leader isn't principled. So you can't afford to have loose cannons in your top team. But there we go. Right, we'll go for the last few. We'll sort of come to the end now. Ed Miliband, one of his best performers when it comes to the climate's 100% on fire. Yes, completely on top of his brief. It would be madness to even move him. I wouldn't even give him a promotion. That is the job he's clearly really interested in. He's completely on top of it. He's a brilliant performer on it in any context. He's massive. And bear in mind, like, you know, you think to yourself, well, where was this Ed Miliband when he was leader? Well, people do get better, you know, as they get... Because the only people who never get better with age are those whose arrogance is such that they don't believe they can. Because if you don't believe you need to improve, you won't improve, because you won't... Improvement has to be driven. So if you are humble enough to recognise that you have still got room for improvement, then you will improve, because you will work at it. So Ed Miliband is... I still don't think he should be leader, because I still don't think... but who knows in the future? Maybe he has another crack at it. But he's certainly improved as a parliamentary performer and a performer in public. Definitely better than he was. And I think that is because he's worked on it. Yes. But I think I would keep him exactly where he is, because it's an incredibly important job. And he's all over it. All over it. Chris Bryant, too important on the Privileges Committee. Well, at the moment, technically, he's not on the... He's on the Standards Committee. He's the chair of the Standards Committee. He recused himself from the Privileges Committee. I don't know whether he's moved back to it now, in all honesty. He recused himself, remember, for Boris Johnson. But now that that's dealt with, I suppose, in theory, Harriet Harman can step back and he can retake the position. But he is still chair of the Standards Committee. And he does do an important job there. But anyway... why can't Labour have a promise of a referendum on PR? No referendum. Promise it in the manifesto. The reason why we don't want a referendum, first of all, it will just be another distraction. Second of all, we don't know how to do referenda in this country. Put it in the manifesto. But why they're not doing that, fear of it being a distraction from the policies they want to push on the public. The fact that the right wing will turn the election into that issue and they don't want it to. That's what the issue is. So that's what we need to combat. They're not going to promise it in this manifesto. The challenge is to get Labour to promise PR in the next manifesto. But I'm telling you now, in order to do that, we need an external campaign. There is there's a very strong internal campaign in Labour, which I'm going to keep plugging over as we get up to the next election. Labour campaign for electoral reform. If you're a Labour member, join it. That's the best thing you can do. But there has to be an external, visible... Remember, people will say, well, there are extra Labour campaigns, like outside Labour PR campaigns. If the public don't know about them, no, they're not. If the public do not know about a campaign, that campaign does not exist. What does a campaign exist to do? Its primary goal is visibility. That is the primary goal of any campaign, to raise awareness. If the public are not even aware of your campaign, they're certainly not going to be aware of your aims. Until the average voter is aware that there is a specific pro-PR campaign group outside of Labour, then no such campaign exists. Waste of money, waste of time, waste of support. So there needs to be a visible one. So in order to get PR, we need a campaign group outside of Labour getting themselves known in public. until that happens, no point complaining at Labour. The campaign within Labour is already strong. We're going to make it stronger. But it alone cannot do it. We need that external one. We need the public on this, right? But that's what I'll say on that one, on that more sort of pleasant note there. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good day. I'm afraid I'll be back on Thursday. I'm afraid the noise will also be back because he's here all week. But have a good day, and until next time, I will see you later.